is fully virtual, as you can tell, and we must address a few housekeeping matters first. For today's meeting, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition for the purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. We all appreciate that. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves, but if I notice you've not unmuted yourself, I will ask if you would like the staff to unmute you. And if you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. I remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies. If there is a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. You will notice a clock on your screen that will show how much time is remaining. At 1 minute remaining, the clock will turn to yellow. At 30 seconds remaining, I will gently tap the gavel to remind members that your time is almost expired. And when your time has expired, the clock will turn red and I will begin to recognize the next member. In terms of the speaking order, we will follow the order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member. Then members present at the time the hearing is called to order will be recognized in order of seniority. And finally, members not present at the time the hearing is called to order. Finally, House rules require me to remind you that we've set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for my opening statement. Let me extend a warm welcome to our members, distinguished witnesses, and those listening to this hearing. My goal as chair of the House Energy and Water Subcommittee is to help our generation embrace a better future for those that follow. We must sustain life on Earth and help our country to meet the challenges as we face the dawn of a new era for energy and water. Over half a century ago, Ohio Senator John Glenn embraced the future in his momentous journey as the first human being to orbit the Earth. Since that moment, the Earth's place in our vast universe has never been perceived the same. People gained a new perspective on our blue planet suspended in space. Scientist Carl Sagan observed, "Preserve and cherish the blue dot. It is the only home we've ever known." Across our world, that view of Earth from space began to influence the thinking of leaders from all walks of life. More came to understand about the Earth's ability to sustain itself. More sophisticated imaging, like ozone monitoring, led to greater understanding of our collective impact on the vital resources essential to sustaining life on Earth. None more key than those in our subcommittee's name: energy and water. Their availability cannot be presumed. We must work together to assure our Earth is protected from the harm that can be caused by mistakes and even ignorance. Looking at recent events across our country, who could have predicted the perilous winter energy disaster that just struck Texas and Oklahoma? Yet, natural disasters happen, and they do so with alarming regularity these days. But the severity of what these regions have endured alert us to pay attention to the why of what occurred. It appears that existing power systems were not suited or prepared to embrace an energy future that had not been properly imagined. Similarly, last year, wildfires in California and Oregon were among the largest on record. Arizona experienced 100 days with over 100 degrees. Scientific consensus indicates the Earth is warming at an unsustainable rate. Glaciers and sea ice are melting at historic rates. Our oceans are warming, rising, and acidifying. Humans and human activity are the primary cause. In the mid-20th century, approximately 150 million people have lived in the United States. Today, the U.S. population has more than doubled to over 330 million people, and globally the population growth has risen even faster, from 2.5 billion in 1950 to nearly 8 billion now. The cumulative load on Earth and its atmosphere is impacting life itself. We must use what we have learned over the last half century to heal our atmosphere and, in turn, our blue dot. As America stands at a crossroads in the new energy age, we are here today to explore strategies for energy and climate innovation. We are lucky to have the Department of Energy, the federal government's leading agency for research and development of new clean energy technologies under our jurisdiction. Technologies developed with DOE's funding are already helping address climate change. They have markedly driven down the price of wind, solar, energy storage, and efficient light bulbs by 60 to 95% since 2008. They have led to widespread deployment and consumer savings. New innovations will lead to new opportunities. Reversing the impacts of climate change will create good-paying jobs across every state in our country. Already, there are more Americans working in energy efficiency and energy production jobs than as waiters and waitresses combined. We must continue to innovate and lead in these areas so our nation is not left behind. As people and communities succeed, so will America. Our witnesses today will enlighten us with a path forward, and I'll turn now to our very able ranking member, Mr. Simpson, for opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kaptur. Thanks for holding this hearing today. I'm happy to join you once again on the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee as we start a new Congress. I'd like to echo your welcome to our witnesses. We thank you all for participating today and look forward to hearing your perspectives on strategies for energy and climate innovation. President Biden has said that advancing a clean energy future and addressing climate change will be a strong focus of this administration. There is room for significant bipartisan cooperation on this issue if we take the right approach. In fact, this subcommittee and the Department of Energy programs it funds have been pursuing bipartisan climate change solutions for decades now and have numerous successes to show for it. What won't work anyway is our command and control regulatory heavy schemes. It would harm the American economy, boost our economic competitors such as China, and quite likely lead to increases in global emission. Real solutions, on the other hand, are focused on innovation and clean energy technology. I was pleased to see Chairwoman Kaptur frame our hearing around this type of proven approach. Experience shows we can continue to grow our economy and provide good-paying jobs to hardworking Americans by being at the forefront of improving current clean energy technology and developing new technologies for use here at home and around the globe. Written testimony from the witnesses highlights the need to continue and ideally increase federal investment in research and development across the broad spectrum of clean energy technologies, including advanced nuclear, energy storage, alternative fuels such as hydrogen, geothermal, hydropower, carbon capture, utilization and storage, as well as wind and solar power. I'm also interested in the ideas offered on how to structure this federal investment rather than assuming that just putting more dollars alone will be sufficient, particularly since I'm not convinced it is politically feasible to think that we can spend our way out of this issue or even outspend the economic competitors like China. I look forward to the future and exploring these issues with our witnesses, and I thank Chairwoman Kaptur for calling this hearing today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simpson, and I'm very excited about the witnesses who are joining us here today. First, we will have Ms. Robin Milliken. Ms. Milliken is a director at Breakthrough Energy, which is a network of entities and initiatives established by Bill Gates to advance clean, reliable, affordable energy. As an expert in U.S. clean energy policy, Ms. Milliken leads the organization's federal efforts to accelerate the development and diffusion of new technologies. Next, we will have Dr. Colin Cunliffe, a senior policy analyst with the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. Dr. Cunliffe focuses on improving national and global innovation systems to address climate change and co-authored the recent book, Energizing America, a roadmap to launch a national energy innovation mission. Following that, we will have Dr. Parthan Sarathi, a professor of public policy and director of the Science, Technology, and Public Policy program at the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan. Her research and interest focus on how to develop innovation and innovation policy to better achieve public interest and social justice goals. And finally, we will have Mr. Rich Powell, the executive director of ClearPath and ClearPath Action, Mr. Powell has also served as a member of the 2019 Advisory Committee to the Export-Import Bank and was previously with McKinsey & Company in the Energy and Sustainability Practices portfolio. And thank you all for taking the time to be here today. Without objection, your written statements will be entered into the record. Please feel free to summarize your remarks in about 5 minutes each, starting with Ms. Milliken.
Thank you for the introduction, Chairwoman Kaptur. Chairwoman Kaptur, Ranking Member Simpson, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to be here today and for fostering bipartisan dialogue on a topic that is of vital importance to the country. My name is Robin Milliken, and I'm here on behalf of Breakthrough Energy, a network founded by Bill Gates of philanthropic programs, investment vehicles, and policy initiatives with the common mission to help the world reach net zero emissions by 2050. Our efforts are guided by the conviction that everyone needs access to affordable, reliable, and clean energy, which is central to today's discussion. My remarks will focus on framing the issue of why we need innovation, why it's beneficial for the climate and our economy, and how federal investment can help support it. Next slide, please. So, why do we need federal innovation? In short, we have a greenhouse gas emissions problem, not just here, but globally. And those emissions are embedded in every part of the economy, including electricity, transportation, industry, buildings, and agriculture. We have some promising solutions like renewable energy, which we should be using widely. These can take us a long way, but not all the way. A recent National Academy's consensus study notes we will also need on-demand electricity resources to complement a majority renewables grid, as well as solutions for aviation, shipping, steel, cement, and chemicals manufacturing. Similarly, a 2020 International Energy Agency report estimated that nearly half of the technologies needed to address emissions in the next 30 years are at the prototype or demonstration phase. Developing these solutions will require a big effort, especially in the next decade. Next slide, please. So, what is the federal government's role in this process? Unfortunately, as you see on this slide, clean energy technology is not like software where venture capital has been enormously successful. It's much harder. Energy involves capital-intensive infrastructure, often long development cycles, and is being deployed at the end of the day in an industry that is highly regulated and risk-averse. On top of this, there is no natural market demand for low-carbon products other than that which public policy or voluntary commitments provide. This means we need the federal government to lead in developing the resources that we need to develop technology, demonstrate to the market that it works and is safe, and to provide policy support so that it can overcome market barriers. Next slide, please. Beyond reducing emissions, innovation is also needed to ensure that our country remains globally competitive in the industries of the future. A breakthrough energy study that we released in September of last year found that federal research and development currently supports over 1.6 million jobs nationwide, has wages that are well above the national average, and it contributes $66 billion more to GDP than we spend on it. That is a very good return on investment. Looking specifically at energy R&D, that investment supports over 112,000 jobs today, and those jobs are in every state in the country. This shows how important research and development and other innovation support is to our economy right now. Moreover, in the long term, investment in innovation contributes to patents and invention that end up underpinning the products and companies that will keep America competitive in the future. So it's both a win in the short and the long term. And we know if we export these technologies, we can both reap economic benefits at home and also have an impact on the emissions profile of the rest of the world. Next slide, please. In conclusion, to maximize the opportunity of innovation and also to move with sufficient speed and scale to address the challenges ahead, we need a true national innovation strategy. I want to leave the subcommittee with 5 key points here. First is that we should expand federal funding for clean energy innovation overall. Breakthrough Energy suggests building up to a level comparable to that of NIH, but ultimately this will need to be driven by bottom-up needs. Second, additional funding should add coverage in underinvested but critical technology areas. For example, we are underinvesting in manufacturing relative to its share of global emissions, as you see in the chart at left. Third, Congress should allocate greater resources toward demonstration and deployment activities, given the large number of technologies that are at the pre-commercial phase. Fourth, over the longer term, Congress should consider substantial updates to the structure in which our investments are allocated. This includes exploring more ways to get more innovation happening in more places around the country. And last but not least, as the country recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic, Congress should consider temporary measures to fund innovation efforts that can directly support economic activity in the next few years. These include increasing extramural funding for small businesses and investment in demonstration and deployment projects that create jobs and reduce technology costs. Congress must weigh many trade-offs in each of these points, but I believe they provide a good starting place. Thank you again for the invitation to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Milliken. And Dr. Cunliffe, please begin.
Chairwoman Kirkpatrick, Ranking Member Simpson, and distinguished members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony today. I'm here representing the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank that focuses on accelerating innovation to spur growth, opportunity, and progress. I'm also currently serving on the National Academies Committee that produced the report, Accelerating Decarbonization of the U.S. Energy System. Bipartisan support for innovation is surging. The Energy Act of 2020 includes the legislative priorities of more than 100 members of Congress and was passed by overwhelming majorities in both parties. As this committee considers how to implement the Energy Act and fund the Department of Energy's research programs, it is wrestled with questions about the scale and scope of energy programs. And I hope my testimony can be useful as you begin consideration of fiscal year 2022 appropriations. First, innovation is critical to combat climate change and boost economic growth. The National Academies finds that deep decarbonization is technically feasible, but proactive innovation is essential. As Ms. Milliken said, nearly half of the annual emissions reductions necessary to decarbonize by 2050 will likely come from technologies that are now in early stages of development but are not yet commercially available. But current funding levels are not enough to generate the pace of innovation needed. To accelerate innovation, the National Academies recommends tripling investment in clean energy research, development, and deployment at the Department of Energy. And this tripling target has been recommended by many other organizations. This target is both ambitious and measured. Other national innovation missions in space and health and defense show that the United States can marshal its innovation resources on a much larger scale than it currently does for energy. Federal investment in RD&D has accelerated the development of life-saving drugs and modernized the military's arsenal and put a man on the moon. And by comparison, the federal government has neglected energy innovation. U.S. leadership in clean energy research is now being challenged by China and Europe. China doubled its investment in clean energy R&D between 2015 and 2020, and it now invests twice as much as the United States relative to its economy. As other countries have stepped up their investments in clean energy, the share of clean tech patents granted to U.S. companies has declined by 20%. Tripling the Department of Energy's research and development programs can reverse this decline and restore U.S. leadership in clean energy innovation. Second, as the committee considers what technologies to invest in, it's important to match the research portfolio to critical decarbonization needs. So this figure shows U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by economic sector. Transportation and electricity generation are the largest shares of emissions, followed by industry, buildings, and agriculture. And on the right is the Department of Energy's portfolio broken down by sector. Nearly half of funding is devoted to electricity. Energy science and cross-cutting technologies account for about a quarter, and then transportation, buildings, and industry account for disproportionately small shares. As federal funding ramps up, increases should target the under-resourced sectors for the greatest increases. The highest priority areas include the end-use sectors, manufacturing, vehicles, and buildings, but also cross-cutting technologies such as zero-carbon fuels, energy storage, and carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration, and firm clean electricity generation. Third, the federal government should partner with state and local governments. States bring different priorities, different energy resources, and different industries to clean energy innovation, and we need to take advantage of this diversity to ensure that federal funding helps cultivate regional innovation ecosystems. Doing so will bring local economic benefits to communities around the country and stimulate locally competitive industries. But it's clear the federal government could do more. So this figure shows clean innovation across the country. In yellow, you have the number of clean tech startups. In red, clean energy patents. Innovative activity tends to cluster around research universities and DOE national laboratories, but large parts of the country are not participating in or reaping the benefits from innovation. Congress and DOE can do more to support regional innovation clusters. Such clusters would benefit from clean startup incubators and accelerators, as well as public support for locally cited demonstration projects. This committee now has a tremendous opportunity to accelerate the domestic clean industry, shape the U.S. response to climate change, and help it lead in clean energy efforts worldwide. And I hope that the committee can build off the foundation made by past year appropriations and continue to elevate energy innovation as a national priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cunliffe. Dr. Parthasarathi, please begin.
Thank you. Chairwoman Kaptur, Ranking Member Simpson, and members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to participate in today's hearing. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the important issue of equity in energy and climate innovation. In recent years, it's become clear that low-income and historically disadvantaged communities of color are often unable to gain the benefits of science and technology, yet may be disproportionately subject to their harms. The key to addressing this is to bring equity considerations explicitly into every step of the research and development process, even at the earliest stages. It's easy to provide examples of how energy technology can both reflect and reinforce inequalities. Coal workers have to sacrifice enormously for our renewable energy transition, with lost jobs and devastation in their hometowns. The production and disposal of solar panels expose poor people around the world to health and ecological risks. Energy efficient light bulbs are more expensive and difficult to find in Black and Latinx neighborhoods. The problem is that our customary approach to energy innovation addresses equity concerns after the fact, when the technology has already been developed and deployed. Then governments have to implement subsidy programs to help people access renewable energy technologies, public health measures to manage risks, and retraining programs for those who've lost their jobs. My central point today is that if we want equitable energy technologies, then both governments and technologists must incorporate this goal into the innovation process itself when they're deciding which research to fund, which technologies to develop, and even how technology should be designed. Our innovation decisions aren't just technical or economic, but also simultaneously social, organizational, and moral. And the equity implications are much more predictable than we tend to think. To accomplish this, I suggest that the Department of Energy incorporate additional expertise, both from affected communities and from social scientists, throughout its R&D process. The example of breast cancer provides us with a sense of how this can work. As many of you know, in the 1990s, breast cancer advocates successfully convinced policymakers to integrate the expertise of women with breast cancer into the research enterprise. The National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, for example, pioneered a scientist-patient partnership model that produced greater trust among patients and changed research. Scientists became more aware of what real women experienced and integrated this knowledge into their choices about which research and funding to pursue. In energy, similar changes could be made at the programmatic level and with individual projects. Vulnerable communities often see great benefits in community-based models such as solar microgrids, for example, which enable grassroots empowerment and small-scale or collective entrepreneurship. DOE might create programs specifically to fund community-based energy innovation and reward R&D partnerships between technical experts and affected communities. So rather than a customary approach, what scholars call a decide, announce, defend model, DOE should consider a consult, consider, modify, proceed model. That could also help minimize opposition when innovations are deployed. DOE could also incorporate the expertise of social scientists who know how to evaluate the equity consequences of emerging technologies. First, by favoring interdisciplinary research proposals. Consider a Dutch case where researchers compared 4 smart grid systems and found that low-income communities would experience different impacts depending on the project's design. On the basis of these findings, they provided recommendations to engineers and policymakers. Second, DOE could include such expertise in its own program staff. These experts could inform both the agency and potential grantees on how to explicitly consider equity in R&D and also help identify the most equitable innovation paths for further demonstration. The key is not just to support equity assessments of emerging energy technologies, but to then use the findings to guide priorities for further development. In closing, to ensure that equity is considered in energy and climate innovation, and that inequities are actually reduced rather than exacerbated, we need to incorporate the expertise of both vulnerable communities and social scientists in the R&D process at the outset. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parthasarathi. I'm also a Michigan graduate, so I don't want to show any prejudice. I just want to divulge there. Thank you so very much for your work. Mr. Powell, please begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Kaptur, Ranking Member Simpson, and members of the committee. I'm Rich Powell. I lead ClearPath. We advance policies that accelerate clean energy and industrial innovation. An important note, we receive no industry funding. Climate change is an urgent challenge that merits significant policy action at every level of government and the private sector. We need look no further than the events in Texas and across the Midwest last week to see the havoc extreme weather can have on the energy system. As America creates the clean grids of the future, we must utilize all forms of clean energy to ensure reliability and affordability. As this committee considers its part in a serious set of U.S. climate and clean energy policies, those solutions should be ambitious but also technology inclusive and politically realistic. Policies must support U.S. jobs and ensure American tax dollars are spent wisely. Too often, solutions are oversimplified to a set of false choices: renewables versus fossils, or economy versus the environment. The reality is, solutions should follow a comprehensive agenda to make the global clean energy transition cheaper, faster, and more flexible. We applaud this committee's important role in addressing climate change and hope you continue to build off recent successes. Today, I will first level set on where we are. Second, discuss a roadmap for a goal-oriented public-private investment strategy. And third, look at options to reduce industrial emissions. So where are we and how can we build on your clean energy innovation success? Since 2014, as you can see in my next slide, you have significantly increased federal funding for clean energy R&D on breakthrough technologies. While these investments are impressive, as Ranking Member Simpson mentioned, your strategy to set clear objectives is even more important. Money should follow those objectives to demonstrations through public-private partnerships. These demonstrations are essential for America to provide affordable clean energy technology to the rest of the world. Getting technology from R&D through the Valley of Death to commercialization requires robust public-private partnerships, as we have had with the shale gas revolution. Moonshot goals of bringing technology to market like the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program and the Energy Storage Grand Challenge are perfect examples. Importantly, buyers are interested in the full suite of clean energy technologies. America's largest electric utilities, including Southern Company, Xcel Energy, Duke Energy, and DTE, have committed to reaching net zero emissions by 2050. But these utilities have emphasized that many of the 24/7 clean technologies required to get them to net zero are not commercially available today. The last time I testified before this committee, Ranking Member Simpson and Chair Kaptur spoke passionately about putting cost filters in place to avoid waste and setting goals with clear outcomes. While getting that strategy right may seem overwhelming, in December, you passed an omnibus package that included the Energy Act of 2020, a roadmap for goal-oriented clean energy investing. It sets a commercialization strategy that focuses the American innovation engine around technologies that, as Ms. Milliken noted, the International Energy Agency identified to meet global decarbonization goals. It codifies the demonstration programs you have already established for advanced nuclear and energy storage, and builds on that same structure for a wave of carbon capture, direct air capture, and enhanced geothermal systems as well. Specifically, as shown on my next slide, the Energy Act launches initiatives to support these programs over the next several years. As you can see, the full scope of the programs is impressive and would put the U.S. on a path to demonstrating more than 20 commercial-scale projects across 5 major technology areas by the middle of this decade, likely the largest clean demonstration program in history. We are talking about more jobs, more private sector investments, and remaining the leading clean energy exporter. Recognizing your job is very different from the job of authorizers, we are excited about these demo programs and look forward to working with you as you craft your FY22 bill. Our mantra in power sector work has been that the U.S. needs more clean and affordable technologies to meaningfully reduce global emissions. This holds even truer in the industrial sector. As you can see in my next slide, the industrial and power sectors combined now make up half of U.S. emissions. For the first time in 2020, industrial emissions were likely larger in the U.S. than power, and the industrial sector includes many energy-intensive trade-exposed manufacturers, including steelmakers. Without low-cost options for low-emitting technologies, emissions limits will almost certainly cause industrial activity to relocate to other countries with worse environmental standards, degrading U.S. competitiveness while potentially increasing global emissions. In December, Congress provided a head start on this innovation priority. You included more funding at the Office of Fossil Energy and the Advanced Manufacturing Office to work on industrial emissions. As this committee looks to accelerate both American manufacturing job growth and industrial emission reductions, we recommend the following 3 points. First, as Ms. Milligan and Dr. Cunliffe recommended, we need more R&D on reducing and capturing emissions from existing heavy industry. Second, let's set realistic goals for demonstrating breakthroughs. And third, we should create conditions for U.S. manufacturers to thrive, ideally bringing home their operations from higher emitting countries like China. This committee has been at the forefront of clean energy innovation. You dramatically increased clean energy R&D, focused efforts at DOE by setting ambitious commercialization goals, and made sure America stays ahead in the global clean energy race. 2021 provides us with many exciting opportunities to continue this progress. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so very, very much. I'm just excited by all of your presentations. And since this is our first hearing of the year, I'll remind members again about our hearing rules, as I mentioned at the beginning. I remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies. If there is a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. You'll notice a clock on your screen that will show how much time is remaining. At 1 minute remaining, the clock will turn to yellow. At 30 seconds remaining, I will gently tap the gavel to remind members that your time is almost expired, and when your time has expired, the clock will turn red and I'll begin to recognize the next member. In terms of speaking order, we will follow the order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member, their members present at the time the hearing is called to order, then recognized in order of seniority, and finally members arriving after the gavel by order of arrival. A second round of questions may occur after all members have an opportunity for a first round, and I know we might be interrupted by votes, so I will try to move it along. We'll now begin questioning under our normal rules, and this is the order I have. After myself, Mr. Simpson, Ms. Wasserman-Schultz, Mr. Fleischman, Ms. Kirkpatrick, Mr. Newhouse, Ms. Lee, Ms. Herrera-Butler, Mr. Ryan, Mr. Reschenthaler, Mr. Kilmer, Ms. Watson-Coleman, and Ms. Frankel. Let me ask our witnesses. Many of you have mentioned innovation in clean energy manufacturing and efforts to reduce carbon pollution from the industrial sector. Developing these strategies should rebuild domestic manufacturing to be robust and not leave any regions or communities behind, especially those that have been left behind. In so doing, we will build back a better way of life, including good-paying jobs for all Americans. Given the challenges of reducing emissions from the industrial sector, can you discuss how addressing them can create economic and job benefits, and how should we approach the innovation process to ensure we get those benefits in every region that desperately needs them, which has not happened for a very long time.
I'm happy to start.
Please, Doctor.
So I think I would think about this in two ways. The good news is that I think that we already see places where communities have begun to try to take advantage of the renewable energy transition and empower themselves. So, for example, tribes, the Navajo and Hopi tribes out west have already begun to manage the fact that many of them are off grid. 15,000 Navajo homes don't have power. And so there's an organization called Native Renewables that has essentially attempted to bring off-grid solar to those homes. And at the same time, they are helping people in those tribes develop the skills to build off-grid solar and participate in solar energy. We see similar things in Puerto Rico as well. And so I think it's important to build on existing community efforts and leverage that, see what they're doing well and how we can support that, and then perhaps bring those insights to other places where they have been struggling. They don't necessarily know what direction to go in terms of the energy transition. And so I think that's one thing that's interesting. But at the same time, I would also say that while Native Renewables, Resilient Power Puerto Rico, for example, are excellent examples of how they've simultaneously been building solar panels and reskilling their workforce, in terms of renewable energy. At the same time, there are also communities who it may not work that well. Those same efforts might not work well in those communities. And so when we think about the most marginalized communities where we want to make sure that there's equitable economic opportunity, we have to look specifically at what might work well in those communities, but mindful of these positive experiences that might provide lessons for them.
Thank you very much. Does any other witness wish to comment?
Chair Kaptur, if I can just add, I think unfortunately last week's experience in Texas has shown us that, especially for poor and marginalized communities, extremely resilient and affordable power supply is paramount, as so many people were left without power in a dangerous extreme weather event. I do think that technology can be part of the solution to that problem, and I think that as we go forward, there are a number of sort of ultra resilient clean energy technologies, many of which are already well on your agenda, that ought to perhaps receive extra attention and extra focus. In particular, I'd think about long duration storage, advanced non-light water nuclear, and enhanced geothermal systems as three technologies I'd categorize as ultra resilient, that if they'd been deployed more widely in Texas, for example, we might have avoided at least some of the issues we saw with the Texas grid and some of the issues then that had on particularly economically disadvantaged communities.
Before I turn to Mr. Simpson on this first round, I just want to implore every member of our subcommittee and every one of our witnesses, help us help the Department of Energy. We need to better meet the ground. If you look at where our energy labs are located, there's a lot of synergy around those places, but really there isn't a comfort level in other parts of America that desperately need that technology. And if we look at some of the programs that currently exist within the Department of Energy, they could be so much better. If you look at an agency like HUD, they have the Community Development Block Grant Program. Whether you like the program or don't like the program, they have found America in every community and hamlet. The Department of Energy really doesn't have anything like that. The closest we get is the weatherization program, and I won't go into all the complexities on that score. If you look at the Department of Transportation and the way, the mayors flock to the Department of Transportation and all of our county engineers and state transportation director, they have met the ground. The Department of Energy is a little more esoteric, in my opinion. And as much as I respect it, in terms of their ability to refine their programs in the modern era, they really need our help. I was really shocked at one point when the director of the National Nuclear Security Agency came to Ohio, mainly because I was the chair of the committee, right? So they want to make sure they're funded, but they had never set foot in Ohio before, ever. I thought, wow. That in itself was a huge mind-opening experience for me. And I would caution our members, think about the last time you saw them in your area. And what face they had, the Department of Energy in your region. So I think a key question for us, and you think about it for the second round, how should we approach the innovation process to assure that there are economic benefits in every region and district, and how can we improve the Department of Energy programs to do that? I'd like to now turn the questioning over to my dear colleague, Congressman Simpson.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's very interesting to hear the testimony of the witnesses today. I appreciate all of them being here today. Let me ask a question, first of all, of Ms. Milliken. The National Laboratory System has long been labeled the crown jewel of our nation's research and innovation ecosystem. The national labs house an exceptional workforce and unique capabilities that this committee has supported and built upon year after year. The national labs as a system are connected to universities, businesses, communities across the country. Even though they might not have a national lab in every state, they are connected all across this country and applying their expertise to many of our nation's most challenging and urgent problems. One of the Breakthrough Energy's proposal is for a new National Institutes of Energy Innovation modeled on the National Institutes of Health. That imagines focused institutes located at sites around the country separate from the national laboratories or the other hubs that we have. I think it's 6 hubs. We've got like 17 national laboratories. How is this different from the hubs and institutes that the DOE currently supports? And how would the national labs fit into this vision? Would it be just separate? I mean, I think all of us agree we need to do more in the terms of investing in research and development stuff. I don't think there's any argument there. My concern is the structure of how we do that. And if we just spread out our resources so finally across the nation, do we really get the bang for the buck rather than through the national laboratory system that we currently have?
Thank you, Ranking Member Simpson. I'm very glad to be asked this question. The idea you referred to, the National Institutes of Energy Innovation, is an idea that Mr. Gates proposed in December, and we're enormously excited about it. It's an idea that really comes from looking at the great experience that we've had with the National Institutes of Health, where we've been able to do incredible things in the health and biomedical space. We'd love to see the same thing happen in energy and climate. Of course, it's not a perfectly analogous example because energy commercialization challenges are much harder, not in terms of the problem, but in terms of having the sort of private sector incentives on the pull side. Nonetheless, though, we think of developing affordable, reliable energy should be a national mission that we place on the same level. So Senator Alexander proposed something like a Manhattan Project for Energy, and we really hope that the public can get behind climate and energy in the same way that we have through NIH. I think when we look at the Department of Energy, we think the problem is sort of twofold. We think that there needs to be a better internal structure to do this work so that critical things like low carbon fuels, industrial decarbonization, and energy storage aren't sort of buried down in the structure or tackled, as crosscuts. We also think there is a need to expand the capabilities, as you suggested, sir, on the capabilities within the national labs to focus on these challenges and to have more centers of innovation like the national labs in more places. We think this could be especially powerful for fossil fuel communities, for example, that are going to be in transition or underserved areas. I will say the idea that we've put out is still under development, and we'd love to shape it with you and others in Congress. But in any scenario, we do see the national labs as remaining a very critical component. And in fact, we'd like to grow their role to focus on commercialization of low carbon technology. One possible setup is you could have existing national labs host new centers of excellence with industry and academia to focus on some of these challenges. So again, we look forward to your input and to working with you on this.
Well, I appreciate that because one of my, as I said, I don't think anybody disagrees that we need to increase our investment in all of these renewable energies and clean energy and that type of thing. It's a question for me as an appropriator of how we do that. How do we get the biggest bang for the buck? And when we've got these gems out here, and we all know that the national laboratories play a vital role no matter how this all turns out. But if there's a better way to invest the resources to get a better result, I'm all for that. So I would love to sit down with you all and talk about how we move forward in that. It's a very important aspect of it from an appropriation standpoint. And Rich, I appreciate your testimony and the importance of nuclear energy and what it's going to be to the future of this country. And if you're going to address climate change, nuclear energy is going to be a huge part of that.
Absolutely. It's an indispensable tool. It currently remains by far the largest source of clean energy in the United States. It's a proven technology that's helped decarbonize other major developing economies around the world. And on this theme of industrial emissions, it's one of our very few options to reliably produce low carbon heat, so that you could actually imagine running something like a steel plant or a concrete facility with far fewer carbon emissions. So finding ways to preserve the assets we have and then expand our nuclear capabilities going forward has to be near the top of the list of innovation priorities.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for keeping your remarks within the time limit.
You bet.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Simpson. I just wanted to commend to my colleagues' attention a story in the New York Times today about the role of China and electric cars. As we proceed forward, it's important for us to understand unfair international competition and how we succeed against nation states that are subsidizing at a level that is almost beyond belief. But that is part of what we face as we try to innovate in our country. I would now like to go to Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz if she's still on the floor. If she's not on the screen, then we will go to Congresswoman Kirkpatrick. I think Congresswoman Kirkpatrick, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate your having this hearing. As you've heard me say before, I was born and raised on tribal land in Arizona, and we got our energy from a generator at the river, the White River. And you know, sometimes it would break down and we'd be without any kind of energy for days. So we always stored candles and lanterns and flashlights in our homes to get through those times. So this is very important to me, very timely. You know, we want to make sure that our tribal communities are treated equitably and that they have renewable energy technology to rely on. So my first question is for Dr. Pardasathi regarding the equitable approach to renewable energy technology for our tribal communities. You know, we have an abundance of solar energy in Arizona. And is that part of your portfolio? If you could address that for me, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. So I think that from my research, what I've seen is that there's enormous potential and there's enormous activity happening among Native Americans in sort of Arizona, Utah, New Mexico area, among, as I mentioned earlier, among both the Navajo and Hopi people. And you see sort of two things happening. And I think both of them are ripe for support from DOE, for example. And the first thing, which I mentioned earlier, is that as you yourself have experienced, so many of these homes are off-grid, right? And so this organization, Native Renewables, is attempting to develop solar energy for these communities and at the same time train these individuals to install solar as a means of workforce development. And so at the same time, I know that some of these lands, some of these peoples are transitioning out from heavy mining, heavy involvement in mining, and looking to see whether older mining lands might be repurposed for solar energy. And those projects are relatively early in their development. But I think on in both dimensions, we can think about DOE support. I think when we think about how can we support these communities in what they want to do and what they feel is most appropriate for themselves, both in terms of procedurally, that they feel that they have ownership, they know their lands, they know their lives best, they can, they can direct innovation and technology and workforce concerns, but also in terms of the kinds of technologies that might work best for them. Those are, I think, opportunities for innovation that we don't tend to think about. We often tend to think about underserved communities generally, and certainly Native Americans in particular, as beneficiaries at the last stages of innovation. We're then in a position of making sure that the innovation that we develop reaches those communities. But instead, what I'm suggesting is that we center those communities and we say, how can serving those communities, what those communities say they want, how can serving them actually produce innovation for us? And that could then help other underserved communities and actually center equity and innovation.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me. So we have large swaths of land, tribal land, especially in northern Arizona, that the power lines run right over their tribal land, and that they're not attached to the grid. And so a few years ago, I delved into it, and I was just told it's too expensive to attach them to the grid. So they pretty much have to have a standalone energy source. Solar seems perfect to me for that, and they're embracing solar. And so, we'd like to see much more investment in solar energy on tribal land. I think it's the perfect solution. So many of these communities are remote, and they're remote from each other. So running a power line doesn't really make sense. But if you have standalone energy resources for those communities, to me that makes the most sense. And it's renewable, it gets passed on to our grandchildren, and it keeps the climate clean, which is a top priority of mine. So, I appreciate your work.
Thank you. I'll just say really briefly that when I hear the words too expensive, I think that's an opportunity for innovation, right? That's what we used to say about solar 10 years ago. So these are opportunities, I think.
I agree. And at some point, it might make sense to have standalone home solar units on houses in very remote areas. So I looked into that a couple of years ago too, and it was still pretty expensive. But I think, like you said, with innovation, we can bring those costs down and make that power available to people. So thank you very much for your testimony. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I thank the members for staying within their time limit. Again, I ask the members, as you look at Department of Energy programs, take weatherization, you will find a really arthritic program, a program that cannot embrace innovation easily, house by house by house, as opposed to community by community by community, or neighborhood by neighborhood by neighborhood, or integrating other programs more easily. You will find arthritis at the Department of Energy. We need your help. All right, Congressman Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Simpson, for holding this hearing. This is truly exactly what we love to look at Oak Ridge, the reservation I represent. I want to thank the witnesses. I've got 3 questions, so I'll try to be as brief with the questions and ask for rather terse answers. Ms. Milliken, as we think about our national energy innovation capabilities, where does scientific computing and advanced manufacturing, such as Oak Ridge National Labs leadership, fit in, please?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. That is an excellent one. So much of our conversation centers around energy technologies and specifically generation technologies, but we also have these really great platform technologies that can apply in a lot of different contexts, like scientific computing, that we also need to be investing in. Oak Ridge has one of the best, supercomputers in the world, as you know. And one of the really amazing things that we've been able to do with computing capacity is actually look at some of the materials and chemistries that can go into lots of different technologies. One thing I'll just quickly mention is a really cool example is a thing called a metal organic framework that is a nanoparticle that if you, it has one of the internal structure, or its internal structure is one of the most extensive of any particle on Earth. And if you were to unfurl a gram of it, it would cover an entire football field. And we've been able to analyze that with computing to find what are the best kinds of these metal organic frameworks that we can use, for example, in carbon capture technology, because it essentially creates a molecular cage that can capture CO2 particles. So really cool things going on, and Oak Ridge is at the forefront of it.
Thank you. Appreciate that answer. Mr. Powell, so glad to see you, and please give our best to our dear friends at ClearPath. In addition to operating nuclear reactors, there is a resurgence in new nuclear technologies. This broad bipartisan enthusiasm over advanced reactors is in part due to private sector developments that have advanced in recent years. Dozens of advanced reactor designs are being developed by entrepreneurs across the country, many preparing to put steel in the ground in a few short years. While these designs are promising, developing a new nuclear reactor design requires significant upfront capital. In fiscal 2020, we directed the Department of Energy to launch the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, the ARDP, which awarded 10 private companies grants to accelerate their deployment. Most significant grants are to demonstrate first-of-a-kind advanced reactors in the next 6 years. With China and Russia continuing to expand their influence and building new nuclear reactors in other countries, this program is even more important to help the United States maintain a strong industry and competitive nuclear industry. My questions are, why do you believe this program has the potential to be successful, and why do you believe this program is necessary? And my follow-up question will be, what can this committee do to help ensure ARDP is successful? Dr. Powell.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman Fleischman. Terrific to see you too, and thank you for your long and dedicated support for nuclear innovation and all of the great technologies at Oak Ridge and across the lab system. The Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, the ARDP, is perhaps the most exciting new development in the advanced nuclear space in a decade. Your decision to prioritize really next generation technologies, to find multiple different technologies that can be invested in, so you have multiple horses running, and I think very crucially to assemble an industry council that represented not just the folks who are developing and promoting the technologies, but the folks that actually might buy the technologies or finance those upfront developments as part of the selection process to buy them, was really also an innovation in policy design. And so I think we can all have greater confidence that the right portfolio of technologies was selected because you got the buyers and the investors involved in the selection process, alongside the great folks who work at the Department of Energy and led that process. So I think we can be more confident that the program will succeed and that we've got a robust portfolio of technologies there. In terms of what you can do going forward, I think two things. I mean, first, crucially, it's a big program and it's going to need large and continuing and dedicated support over the next 5 years. You write the checks. Just as importantly, though, I think holding that program accountable. You set very aggressive milestones for when those reactors need to be developed. As you said, a 6-year time frame, that will be record time to develop and license and site and begin construction of a new advanced reactor. And so you're really going to have to hold the Department of Energy across multiple presidential administrations to account to make sure that that's delivered on time and on budget, and that we think back on the program as a success. That program, I think, now will serve as a model for many of the other technologies that were included in the Energy Act of 2020 as well. And I think the same approach can be applied there.
I thank the gentleman very much for staying within the time limit. The gentleman's time has expired. We are going to go to our next member, a new member of our subcommittee, very energized herself, Congresswoman Lee.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairwoman Kaptur, Ranking Member Simpson. This is, to me, an incredibly important hearing. This is my first subcommittee hearing, and I look forward to working with everyone on this committee in a bipartisan manner. You know, I think that what's happened in Texas just recently, this hearing is so incredibly timely, and my heart and prayers go out to everyone in that state who had been adversely affected. You know, every year we're seeing these instances where we are seeing the effect of climate change on having such major implications across this country and communities across this country. I wanted to just make a couple statements first to Mr. Powell regarding nuclear energy. As you know, I come from Nevada, so I always feel like when we talk about research and development and the importance of nuclear energy in our portfolio, you know, I look at also coupled with this is not just the development of technologies, but the development of how we manage waste. And that is something that is obviously becoming so critical across this country and something that's very critical to my state. And so I just hope that that becomes part of this conversation as we talk about alternative energy and research and development. And secondly, I cannot agree more with the concept of potentially matching our research and development to national innovation labs. I just think when you look at the map that we saw here with Dr. Cunniffe on where we see the innovation happening and the research happening, and then you couple it with the map that Ms. Milliken put forth on where you see the the potential coming, there's a mismatch there. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity. And obviously in my state of Nevada, we view this as a key source of economic diversification and development. So I look forward to working with all of you on that. I just want to go back. I want to talk about the costs and technology. So we know that renewable and clean energy, such as wind, solar, and batteries, have dropped between 55 to 94% since 2008. Simultaneous, we've seen the development of robust clean economy, and I'm proud of the progress that my state has made with a 45.5% increase in clean energy employment just in the last between 2006 and 2016 and 2019. And Ms. Milliken, can you walk us through what you view as the major drivers for the decline in the cost of clean energy technology?
Thank you, Congresswoman. That is a great question. I think in the case of solar, that is the perfect example of what we can do when we sort of combine what we call the supply side of innovation with the demand side of innovation. So in the 70s and 80s, we were able to reduce the cost of solar from a very high price point very quickly, roughly 80% through research and development. But then we sort of entered this stagnation period where there wasn't a whole lot of supportive public policy in the 90s and then the early 2000s. But once we saw Germany coming in with the feed-in tariff, Chinese manufacturing bringing down the cost of PV panels, all of these kind of global components coming together. Plus in the United States, you know, on our side of things, we started putting in place things like renewable portfolio standards. You really saw that demand pull side of innovation coming together as well. Tax credits played a role, of course, in addition to portfolio standards. So we really think that same model needs to be used for other clean energy technologies where we are using federal leadership, resources, and support to really drive down the cost through research, development, and demonstration. And then you need to think, you know, on the the demand side about things like procurement and incentives and all the things that can help pull those innovations out from the lab into the marketplace.
Great, thank you. I don't have much time, so I just wanted to say as we move forward, just specifics on from an investment standpoint or also public-private partnership, what should we do to continue to incentivize that to lower the cost?
I could take that as well if it's directed at me. So I think there are a few things to mention here. We really do need that federal leadership, especially on the research, development, and demonstration side. But in tandem, we also need philanthropic and private sector efforts. And I think some of the things that I mentioned in my written testimony around getting the federal structure to be more conducive to coordinating more closely with the philanthropic and private sector would be a really great place to start.
Thank you also very much being conscious of the time. You did excellent, Congresswoman Lee, excellent. All right, Congressman Newhouse, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Simpson, and thank you to all of our panelists that are here with us this afternoon. I too think that this is a very important subject, and I appreciate all of your insights on it. Mr. Powell, welcome. Good to see you again, and thank you for participating and contributing to this important discussion. I want to start off with a couple of questions for you. First of all, as you know, advanced nuclear energy could provide unparalleled domestic benefits as well as substantial clean electricity for generations, and we're all excited about that. But getting the first reactors to commercial operations seems to be the biggest challenge. Mr. Fleshman talked a little bit about this. So my question about that is how integral is federal, certainly congressional support to the success of these current projects and to future innovation? And then secondly, as a follow-up to that, as we discussed, the Department of Energy announced the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program Awards just last, I believe, October. And Energy Northwest in my district was listed as a utility partner for both the X-Energy and the TerraPower GE Hitachi partnerships. And I'm just tremendously excited about the prospect of either one or possibly both of these plants being built in our region. And so with Washington State's mandate for a carbon-free grid by, I believe, 2044 or 45 in mind, how important are projects like this to achieving that goal, both reliably and affordably?
Thanks so much, Congressman. Great to see you as well. Thanks for your continuing leadership on nuclear and on energy storage. Congratulations, by the way, on the leadership of the Western Caucus as well. Very important group of members. So on the two parts of your question, first on how we get these technologies from 0 to 1, and then second, how they play a role in a fully clean energy grid. So, stepping back, the reality is that every new energy technology in the United States history has required significant federal investment to get that technology up and running. That was true in the early days of oil. It was certainly true as part of the shale gas revolution, absolutely true in the first generation of nuclear technologies, in all of the grid scale renewables deployment. So I think we should expect that, for better or for worse, to be true of next generation technologies like advanced nuclear as well. Nuclear is particularly difficult to get from 0 to 1 because of the heavy regulatory burden, the appropriate regulatory burden on such a power dense technology. And so whether it's been the NuScale reactors, which recently sort of broke the barrier and got the first small modular reactors through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or Oklo, the first microreactors, or TerraPower and X-Energy, the first larger scale non-light water reactors that are the selected technologies for the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. All of these would need a significant federal cost share to get the first generation of the technologies running. It would just be extremely difficult to finance that entirely by the private sector. Hence the need in the appropriate role for the program, and then a diversity of sites where it's picked in good host communities, places like your neck of the woods and the broader nuclear complex there, or perhaps the Clinch River site and Tennessee. Finding communities that are already very welcoming to nuclear as the first host communities for these. Now, how they fit into 100% clean energy grid, I think Energy Northwest worked with E3, one of the more sophisticated energy modeling firms, to look at how it could comply with that 100% clean energy mandate. Washington State is sort of you're a vision of the future. You're already at 80 or 90% clean because of your hydro reserves and the other renewable development you have. Now you're going that last 10 to 20% of the way. So you're where so many other states might be 10 or 20 years from now. And that E3 study found that small modular reactors bar none, are the most cost-effective way to get that last 10 to 20% of the way to 100% clean. You really need something that's a firm and flexible zero emission source to fill that remaining gap. If you were to attempt to do the rest of that, for example, entirely with variable renewable energy, right? You know, wind is terrific and extremely cost effective until it's not, right? Until it's reached a very high penetration of the grid. But filling that last part of the gap, it's very clear that a flexible source like nuclear could be the lowest cost way to do that.
Awesome. Perfect. Appreciate that. And thank you again for your contributions today, as well as the rest of the panel. Madam Chair, I'm out of time. I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you for staying within the limit, Congressman Newhouse. I really appreciate it. And I just want to say to the new members on the committee and the returning members, we need an answer to where to store nuclear waste. If it's not going to be Yucca Mountain, which seems to be the will of the state of Nevada, we simply have to find an answer. If I have to support a separate task force to create it, volunteer, I'll put you on it. And but we have to solve this problem for the country. I'm tired of the issue. I inherited it, and I'm determined to find an answer. So all of our experts, help us out. We really need it. Got to move the country forward here. Time's a wasting. Congressman Ryan, Senator Ryan, there he is. All right.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Chairwoman, and excited to be back on this committee. I was on it back when it was Dave Hobson and Pete Visklosky, and we continue the work. So great to be with you and Mr. Simpson. I have a question, Robin, that I'd like your opinion on and maybe some insight. We know that the innovation is critical, and that's really how we're going to get home from the climate crisis. And I've been supporting over the last however many years, with the help of Ms. Capter, the Office of Technology Transitions at DOE. And that is essential to drive some of the innovation that we're talking about across the agency and in the communities throughout the country. And that's why for the last couple of years, I've supported an increase in their budget for clean energy incubators. And incubators like one we started, was one of the last earmarks I got. It's called the Bright Energy Incubator in Warren, Ohio, to empower energy startups and to launch these energy companies. I think it's going to be vitally important for us to, as Ms. Capter talks so eloquently about so often, getting these investments into the communities over the last 30 or 40 years that have lost investment. So coal and steel and auto and rubber, and these communities that really have been devastated. How do we drive some of this investment into those communities? And I think these incubators could be a great opportunity. Brookings had a study a couple years back where businesses that come out of incubators, they locate within 5 miles of the incubator. So we've been putting these incubators in our downtowns, downtown Akron, downtown Warren. There's a business software incubator in downtown Youngstown, because we know that those companies spinning out are probably going to stay in the downtown, which builds capacity there, and there's quality of life, and on and on and on. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the role of startups in the energy innovation economy, and maybe what else, in your view, OTT could do to help continue to cultivate that ecosystem. And I'll let you take the rest of the time.
Thank you, Congressman Ryan. Well, in our assessment, no surprise given Mr. Gates's orientation, we think startups play an incredibly vital role in the overall innovation process. That's true in any industry, but it is certainly true in energy as well. We think that the vital role they play is because if you look at incumbent players, right, this isn't true across the board, but they're often sort of trying to make the thing that they're already making incrementally better, not necessarily working on the truly disruptive, game-changing technology, which is where startups come in. We have a couple of programs at Breakthrough Energy that are oriented toward those, sort of early stage innovators. Breakthrough Energy Ventures was the first effort that we launched that focuses on investing in new companies that can mitigate at least half a gigaton of greenhouse gases when deployed at scale. And then we have a new program called Breakthrough Energy Ventures that is looking at taking researchers and scientists that don't have companies yet, but they might have great ideas, and trying to coach them into understanding how they can take those ideas and turn them into products and companies. And we hope that is a program that helps seed innovation across the country. In terms of what OTT can do, we're really excited that it was authorized for the first time, despite being around for a few years, but authorized for the first time in the Energy Act in December. I think a few ideas come to mind around what they might be able to do to help startups in a more fulsome way. One is, I believe the Energy Act authorized $5 million for them to work more closely with incubators and accelerators. We would like to see that funded. And we would also like to see them have programs like the Small Business Vouchers Program, for example, which focuses on getting small businesses access to the great national lab facilities. We'd like to see that program brought back and funded. So a few ideas off the top of my head. I'll also mention the Small Business Innovation Research Program. That is a program that gets non-dilutive grant funding out to companies. And that program has been very successful. DOE has one that is almost the size of ARPA-E, so we'd like to see that expand as well.
Great.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd be derelict in my duty if I didn't say I'd love for you to come to Ohio and see what we have going on there, and love to partner with you if we could. So thanks, Congresswoman Kaptur, Chairwoman.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for staying within the limit. Greatly appreciated. I just want to make sure Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz is not on, and Congresswoman Herrera Butler is not on. I don't want to miss anybody. Okay. Then we're going to Congressman Rushenthaler, a new member of the subcommittee. Welcome.
Hey, thank you, Chair. I really appreciate it. I just want to start by saying that American innovation, if you just look at the United States, we currently actually lead the world in CO2 emission reduction. China currently emits more greenhouse gases than the United States, Japan, and the EU combined. And also, China has increased emissions by nearly 4 tons for every ton reduced by the United States in the last 15 years. And under the Paris Climate Agreement, China and India, who again emit significantly more carbon than the United States, are allowed to increase their emissions through 2030. But let's just focus on the United States and our innovation. The National Energy Technology Laboratory, or NETL, which I am proud to say is located in southwestern Pennsylvania, actually right down the road from where I grew up, and the Department of Energy's Office of Fossil Energy, these institutions are global leaders in carbon capture research and development. Carbon capture ensures that we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions while still taking advantage of domestic coal and natural gas resources, both of which are produced in my district. Continued innovation in carbon capture technology will benefit our environment, it will benefit our energy sector, and I'd argue just as importantly, it will benefit our economy. With that said, Mr. Powell, the DOE's carbon capture program has long targeted commercial demonstrations in the 2025 timeframe. These goals were incorporated in Congress's recent enactment of the Energy Act of 2020. With the recent extended 45Q tax credit also expiring at the end of 2025, what do you think Congress can do to best support the department's commercialization goals?
Thanks very much for the question, Congressman Rushenthaler. Thanks for your leadership on the China task force and continuing to pound the drum and raise the profile of that massive emissions issue. And terrific to see a fellow Pennsylvanian on the panel. I'm a proud Scrantonian, so great to see that you're here. I think the work that the National Energy Technology Laboratory has done is indeed world leading. We have significantly decreased the cost of carbon capture, and we've now brought it down to the level where for industrial facilities, it's equivalent or less than the incentive we've created in 45Q. So you've now seen a whole wave of industrial facilities across the country, ethanol facilities, cement plants, ammonia plants, say that they're going to take advantage of that incentive and start installing carbon capture. The problem is we haven't yet brought it down to the level where power plants are in the money under 45Q. And so there's work to be done on further demonstrations. We know it works on power plants. It's been demonstrated multiple times around the world. Now it's a question of doing more of it, learning by doing, further bringing down the cost. So in terms of what Congress can do, I think first and foremost, it's funding the wave of demonstrations that are set up in the Energy Act of 2020. That act authorizes 6 total carbon capture demonstrations, 2 more on coal, 2 on gas, 2 in industrial facilities. I think funding those through the Office of Fossil Energy is probably the top priority, especially those gas and those coal demonstrations to further bring down the cost so that then the incentive is enough to get them going by themselves.
So, Mr. Powell, so the incentive is why there's so much commercial interest in carbon capture, the financial incentive, or are there other reasons why the free market is interested in carbon capture?
Well, the incentive is part of it. There's also an opportunity to commercialize the CO2 that's captured as a commodity. So, for example, in Texas, Carbon Engineering, one of the firms that Mr. Gates' organizations have invested in, is partnering with Occidental Petroleum, pulling CO2 directly out of the atmosphere and then putting it into older oil fields to do enhanced oil recovery and produce barrels of oil that are either neutral or net negative emissions barrels of oil. So there's a whole opportunity there in utilizing the carbon capture and emissions. And relatedly, investors in many large energy companies have demanded that those companies go to net zero goals. And many of those companies don't see a way to get to their net zero goals and commitments without some robust use for carbon capture. So there's a bunch of sort of voluntary corporate demand for the technology.
And knowing that we have less than 30 seconds left, what are some opportunities for downstream carbon capture benefits, or how we can use this downstream quickly? I know we're running out of time. Please.
Well, absolutely. I think there's a number of things. There are places for carbon capture that folks don't necessarily think about. There are a lot of smaller industrial facilities, pulp and paper, for example, that could take advantage of this kind of thing. There are also clusters, like in the Louisiana industrial cluster, for example, where multiple different facilities could come together and share common infrastructure to capture the CO2 and sequester it.
Thank you, Mr. Powell, and thank you, Chairwoman Kaptur.
Thank you, Congressman Rushing-Thaler. You're a good member. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
And we got to get some of this carbon capture technology to my district with all of our refineries. So you gave me an idea. Congressman Kilmer, please.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to our guests for being with us. My question's for Dr. Cunliffe. It will probably not surprise any of my colleagues who've been on the subcommittee previously to hear me talk about the only marine lab in the Department of Energy's lab complex. It's the Pacific Northwest National Labs Marine and Coastal Research Lab in my district in Sequim, Washington. And they are really at the leading edge of innovation in marine and hydrokinetic energy, especially focusing on how to use this emerging renewable power source for ocean-based applications and to bring power to remote coastal communities. Dr. Cunliffe, in ITIF's recent report, you call for significantly ramping up investment in the EERE Water Power Technologies Office that funds this work. I was hoping you could share more with the committee about why investing in those technologies is important and the opportunity you see for marine power to contribute to our national and even global climate goals.
Sure, and thank you for the question. I appreciate your long support for marine energy. And of course, I'm very familiar with the great work out of the Pacific Northwest National Lab and with DOE's Powering the Blue Economy Roadmap for Marine Energy. As far as its importance, national resource assessments have found 1.25 to 1.85 terawatt hours per year of untapped, technically extractable marine energy potential. And just for comparison, that's 30% of total electricity generated in the US. But marine energy technologies are still at an early stage of development due to some of the scientific and the engineering challenges associated with the marine environment. So the Powering the Blue Economy Roadmap, as you mentioned, identifies near-term opportunities for marine energy in places that are far from land-based power grids, onboard energy generation and remote recharging. In our report, we did make a couple of recommendations for an innovation agenda for across advanced renewables, including marine energy. And one of the things we found is that price competitions are particularly well suited to marine energy, in part because of the technological maturity, but also the uncertainty about the eventual optimal design. And then also test beds is another area where there's a huge gap. The European Marine Energy Center allows prototypes of up to 1 megawatt to be tested in the open water. And there's really no comparable test bed of that scale in the United States. So those are a couple recommendations for how we could tap into marine energy. I can also, I can keep going. I do think DOE should also focus on maritime systems more broadly. So shipping is a particularly hard to decarbonize sector, and that really requires energy-dense fuels, and the batteries that enable electrification for light-duty cars and trucks are likely not to attain sufficient density for marine shipping. But some opportunities that DOE currently is not exploring really at all include hydrogen and ammonia, but certainly more work is needed. But also for ports, electrification and energy management are opportunities to reduce emissions as well as local pollution.
I really appreciate it. Sorry, I put myself on mute, so I just didn't want to be talking into into the ether. I really appreciate your suggestions. I think the notion of price competitions, I think, is a great idea. The opportunities related to our ports, I think, are enormous, and would really just like to invite your partnership as we start to think about the fiscal year 2022 bill. So thank you for your input. And Madam Chair, I know you've got a lot of folks in the queue, so just out of respect, knowing votes are coming up, I'll yield back the remainder of my time.
How kind of you and how like you, Congressman Kilmer. Thank you so very much. Thank you. We will hear from Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz now, and then we will go to Congresswoman Bustos, Watson Coleman, and Frankel. I don't believe Ms. Herrera Butler has returned to the screen, but she might. So Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, climate change is the defining issue of our time because it affects virtually every policy area. And we also have to recognize that communities of color and marginalized communities in the United States and all around the world are being hit hardest by climate change and pollution. These communities are often forced to confront environmental and public health hazards where they live, work, and play. Professor Parthasarathi, I have some questions. With a last name like Wasserman Schultz, I feel your pain. I have some.
You got it. You're fine.
I have some questions for you, and I also just want you to go back and touch on the breast cancer research that you, as a breast cancer survivor, that was really intriguing, and I'd love to talk to you after the hearing further about that. But your work focuses on achieving social justice goals, ethics and science. How can we approach energy innovation so that it combats the historically unequal impacts of pollution while increasing equitable access to new economic opportunity, improved public health and resilience? This is such an incredibly important challenge that we tackle, and it just feels like there is so much to do. It's hard to know where to begin.
Well, Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz, I was hopeful that we would have the opportunity to talk about breast cancer because over the many years in which I've looked at that issue, your extraordinary work on the issue has been really an inspiration for me. But you raise, of course, a very important point, and the horrible winter storm in Texas last week has already come up in this hearing, and I would be neglectful if I didn't mention that my parents live in Texas and in Houston, and in fact, last week there was a moment of real panic when I wasn't able to find a hotel room for them, and they were struggling. But of course, my parents are relatively privileged. They live in a nice neighborhood. The power came back, the water came back, and they have children who are quick with internet technology around the country. But what we've seen from that episode is the fact that inequality is a nested problem, right? So families who lack power and water in that moment had insecure housing. They didn't have the kinds of funds that my parents had. They don't have, they're obviously also at greater risk when it comes to environmental pollution, air and water pollution, housing issues, et cetera, right? So I think that the key is to understand that it is a nested problem, that these are nested problems, and that from the top down, we don't always understand how those problems are connected to one another. And so that's why, as I said earlier, it's important to engage with communities to find out exactly how these problems work together and how to unravel them. But the other thing that I wanted to mention, which I discussed briefly in my oral testimony, is that there are social scientists doing this work too, that there are scholars who have considered developing equity impact assessments. For example, in the areas of health equity impact assessments, social equity impact assessments, that I think that we can bring into the energy space. These discussions are newer here, right? Environmental impact assessments, of course, are something that we have a lot of experience with, but it doesn't necessarily have that equity dimension to it. And I think bringing in and normalizing that expertise in these conversations is the first place to go to start to even begin to understand what we're dealing with. I think we're still at the stage in this discussion where we don't necessarily know what are the different dimensions of it that we need to consider as we're thinking about new climate and energy innovation.
And briefly on breast cancer, can you elaborate a bit on what you touched on?
Yeah, sure. So in addition to the fact that, as you of course know, in the 90s, breast cancer advocates were able to get huge increases in funding, there were a couple of things that happened that really, I think, revolutionized the game. The first was that breast cancer advocates sit on scientific peer review panels, for example, at the Department of Defense's breast cancer research program. In addition, we see breast cancer advocates as partners across the country in scientific, what seem like scientific projects. And in particular, we've seen the research partnerships that I mentioned, the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences. These kinds of partnerships have changed the kinds of questions that scientists ask. So for example, one of the interesting dimensions of this is that scientists tend to look at environmental causation of cancer at the community level, or sorry, at the county level, and instead patient advocates said, no, actually the operative issue is zip code as opposed to county. They convinced scientists to look at radiation risks, right? So it changed the kinds of questions. It sometimes changed the measurement tools. And those kinds of things are really important. If we, at the end of the day, we're investing in all of this innovation for it to have social impact, right?
Thank you. I would love to follow up with you. If you would reach out to my office, and Madam Chair, thank you for your indulgence. I know I'm out of time, and I yield back.
Well, I know, Congresswoman, you were on the floor speaking, and we thank you for coming back to the meeting. We thank you very much. Congresswoman Watson-Coleman was with us earlier. She may be on the floor herself. Congresswoman Bustos.
I am here.
Oh, you're here. Okay.
Yeah, I am here. Thank you.
Oh, there you are. Oh, okay. Excuse me. All right, Congresswoman Watson-Coleman.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this this hearing that we're having on innovation and the impact on underrepresented and poorer communities. I'm very concerned about that. I'm also concerned about two questions. Number one is that if we think nuclear energy is part of our clean energy portfolio, why are we not doing more research on what to do with its waste as opposed to finding some place to collect it? Why aren't we trying to figure out how to repurpose it? And are we? Should we be investing in that? And the second question is, and since Princeton plasma physics is in my home district, why are we not discussing fusion energy as one of the innovations that we should be investing in, and where do you see it falling on the portfolio line? Those are my questions, Madam Chair.
Congresswoman, I'm happy to take a quick stab at both. First, couldn't agree with you more that we ought to be doing more at the back end of the fuel cycle. We are going to need a long-term repository. No matter what happens, we're going to need some long-term repository. So we need to find a solution on that matter. But there's so much more that we could be doing on repurposing and reprocessing the fuel we had. I think it's better thought of as spent fuel or lightly used fuel than it is as waste. There's so much energy left in it. And a number of these advanced reactor technologies could actually much more easily use that as the fuel to fire those reactors going forward, and potentially also break down some of the nastier things that are left over in the spent fuel from the existing light water civilian nuclear fleet. So we should certainly be doing that. I think there's also more that we could be doing on innovative ways to store the waste. For example, there's a company called Deep Isolation that's looking at whether we could use horizontal drilling technologies to much more quickly go both deep and sideways and find places to securely store, maybe even temporarily store the waste that we'd perhaps all feel a little better about than it being sort of above ground in parking lots, even though that's actually stored relatively securely in those places. Second, couldn't agree with you more on the need to do more on fusion. We were very excited to see that the Energy Act of 2020 had a public-private partnership program included to actually start thinking about really commercializing a fusion reactor technology in this company. There are a number of innovative startups around the country, from Commonwealth Fusion in Massachusetts to TriAlpha and many others on the West Coast that are getting close to something that could actually produce power sustainably. We're not talking about a science project anymore. We're talking about something that's very close to application. I think funding and supporting that fusion public-private partnership could be a great next step to move that forward.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to comment on this particular question? If not, my only last comment has to do with as we move forward and we think about all of these innovations, those communities, those poorer communities, those urban as well as those rural communities, are communities that we need to make sure that DEP really has its eye on and has a commitment to in this administration. And I thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back the rest of my time.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Watson-Coleman. You've given me an idea. I'd like you and Congressman Fleischman to think about this, and if it's okay with the ranking member, maybe we need to have a little task force of our committee look at this issue of waste from our nuclear waste, and have a little more work done by members of the subcommittee before we actually go to hearings and so forth, involving your labs, involving finding witnesses who can talk to us about this, to try to move us forward on an approach which the department seems to be stymied, or we'd have an answer. And so you can think about that and let me know if that interests you.
Thank you, Madam.
As we move forward, and I apologize to Congresswoman Bustos, I should have called on her first, just attributed to my bad handwriting for the day. Congresswoman Bustos.
I can definitely relate to bad handwriting. So thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dr. Cunliffe, this question is for you. In your written testimony, you talked about our country's enormous geologic and terrestrial reservoirs for carbon dioxide sequestration, your words. So want to give you a little background before I ask my question. So the congressional district that I serve sits on top of the Mount Simon Sandstone Basin. You might know that as one of the best geological formations for carbon storage in the entire nation. And on top of that, we have seven biofuel refineries in and around the congressional district that I serve. An ethanol refinery in my district called Pacific Ethanol, located in Pekin, Illinois, wants to capture carbon. And they know that deploying this technology would be good for jobs, good for the economy, good for the environment. And they know they can do it cheaply, maybe less than $25 a ton. And, so we know also that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that there is a need for carbon capture, and even say that it should be a 100-fold scale up in order to meet our 2050 decarbonization goals. So, but right now there's only 26 operational carbon capture and storage facilities across the entire world. 12 of them are in our own country. One more bit of background and then to my question. So the Energy Act, enacted at the end of last year, authorizes Congress to spend almost $7 billion over the next 5 years for carbon capture use and storage programs at the Department of Energy and EPA, which is more than 3 times the authorization limits in previous years. So Dr. Cunliffe, what I want to ask you is, how can we on this committee, appropriators, leverage those innovation funds to get more carbon capture jobs in places like the district I serve, and get businesses like the one I mentioned to have the technology that they need to make this happen?
So, Congresswoman, thank you for the question, and I think you're absolutely right. Ethanol facilities are an excellent near-term opportunity for carbon capture, in part because they produce a near pure stream of CO2. So you don't have to, with ordinary power plants, you have to separate the CO2 from the flue gas, and that's very energy intensive. But with ethanol, it's almost 99, almost 100%. So it's very cheap to capture. It's some of the lowest cost opportunity and the first place that we should start. And we know how to do it. As you mentioned, it's already being done in parts of the US. There still is some cost associated with transporting it and then storing it underground. And one thing that I think is underexplored at the Department of Energy and requires more investment is focus on um, uh, mapping underground reservoirs and characterizing them and understanding the available capacity and injection rates. We know we have a lot already from the U.S. Geological Survey, but we need to really characterize it in much more granular detail. And that's just a hurdle that individual companies can't always overcome on their own. And then I would say just as it's deployed more and more, costs can come down so that other companies that have slightly higher capture costs can continue to build on that infrastructure.
My next question is for Ms. Millican. You highlighted the importance of direct air capture and the impact it can have on achieving our long-term decarbonization goals. Scientists have been very clear about the benefits of direct air capture, sucking CO2 out of the air and burying it underground in places like the place I just mentioned, the Mount Simon Sandstone Basin in Illinois. So we also know that we need to be removing $500 million or 500 million or more tons of carbon dioxide per year by 2050. And right now, we're not even removing 1 million tons per year. So my question is, what research, design, and demonstration steps does this subcommittee need to take to get direct air capture to the point where we're capturing 500 million tons per year?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. Direct air capture is definitely one of the technologies that we think is going to be very critical in the future. Fortunately, it is invented, right? And there are some very small scale pilot projects that are happening right now, one of which Rich Powell mentioned earlier, but it's nowhere near the scale we need it to be. It's also still very expensive. So it's not going to be widely deployed until we can bring costs down. I think there are a lot of different things that could help in the bringing costs down category. Certainly more, research and development into, things that I mentioned earlier, like metal organic frameworks. How we can, sort of reduce the individual components of the system or reduce costs for those individual components rather. We also need to do more demonstration projects. There are some other efforts at the Department of Energy that are mentioned in the Energizing America report that Dr. Cunliffe co-authored that speak to this subject as well. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that as you all think about FY22 funding there.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Bustos. Now the winner of the big bouquet this afternoon is Congresswoman Frankel. She has waited throughout the whole hearing. Thank you so very, very much, Congresswoman.
I guess that's what I get for being last. Anyway, good to be with all you, and thank you to the panelists. I want to change the subject just a little bit, especially because we have Ms. Milliken on the panel here, but I'd be interested in others' opinions on this. And that's I know Bill Gates has said that alternative protein innovation will be a core part of the fight to halt global heating. Cattle rearing, it surprised me, but apparently it's about 4% of all carbon emissions in the world. So I'd like you to talk about, because we're talking about climate change, how to reduce carbon emissions. What kind of research is being done in terms of producing alternative meats? Do you think it's necessary? Do you think that the federal government should get involved?
Thank you, Congresswoman Frankel. The short answer is yes. Perhaps not surprisingly, I do think that there is a role for federal research and development funding here. There are a lot of different things that go into the agriculture picture. As you mentioned, not all of it is CO2. Actually, a lot of it is methane, nitrous oxide, things for which we don't have great solutions. And Mr. Gates is fond of saying if cattle were their own country, they would be the third largest emitter in the world ahead of India, which is pretty remarkable. So we do need solutions there. I'm not an expert in the ag space, but some things that we talk about frequently in the proteins department are, we need bioreactors that are capable of developing, the synthetic meat that, could potentially help offset some of the, regular consumption of meat. There are also innovative feedstocks that can help reduce emissions from cattle. One thing that they've discovered is certain types of seaweed, if you blend those into cattle feed, can help cattle emit less. There are actually breeding programs that specifically select certain types of cattle that produce less emissions. Actually, the US cattle are among the most efficient cattle in the world, so it's something for us to be very proud of. But there is a lot more to be done here. There are some things at the Department of Energy that are happening in this space. So ARPA-E has some limited agriculture research going on, but a lot of it is at USDA. So we'd like to see both of those efforts be well funded.
Thank you. Anybody else on the panel want to comment on that? Otherwise,
on agricultural emissions more broadly.
Yeah, go ahead.
As Robin mentioned, DOE does have some programs in ARPA-E. The Roots program is aimed at selectively breeding plants with deeper root structures to enhance soil carbon absorption. And then there are some other precision agriculture programs at ARPA-E that are looking at using sensors to maximize fertilizer inputs and minimize watering and other industry inputs, which is a way to lower costs for farmers, but also reduce the nitrous oxide emissions associated with fertilizers. And then Bioenergy Technologies Office is also looking at converting agricultural waste into energy products through anaerobic digesters. So there's a lot going on in this space.
Thank you for that. And just, I think I have another minute. Ms. Middleton, earlier in your comments, you talked about us, I think you said temporarily supporting some businesses or startups. Can you give me some examples of what you mean by that?
Yes, I would be glad to. So one of the really important programs that is not just at the Department of Energy, but is at most federal agencies is called the Small Business Innovation Research Program. That program funds non-dilutive grants to startups and small businesses to work on innovation. And we've seen some pretty great results from that program. So that's an example of a program that, as we think about recovery, we think could be really important because, unfortunately,
Can you give me an example of a business?
Yes, there are actually several businesses that are profiled by, there's a great organization called the Clean Energy Business Network. They've got a handful, not just a handful, numerous business profiles that we'd be happy to send to your staff that have been supported through the Small Business Innovation Research Program. Some of the programs in Breakthrough Energy Ventures portfolio have also in the past received SBIR grants. Not just from DOE, but from other federal agencies like NSF as well. So can't remember a specific company off the top of my head, but would be happy to follow up with your staff about that. But it is a really important program that we think could help provide a lifeline to the businesses that are sort of on the front lines of the pandemic, right? Because as capital tightens up, venture capital, for example, is often the first to sort of go in fiscal crises. So that's an example of a program that we think is very important.
Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. We are going to move to a second round. I just wanted to let the members know that, of course, there's a vote on. We will have probably another half hour Here, they say that's 45 minutes until the gavel will be struck over in the chamber. So I just let members know that. I wanted to move toward a couple questions and then have the panelists respond. In my region, I experienced the following over the last month. Deep fear by the head of the United Auto Workers. Very worried about the transition to clean energy. And with Chinese competition being as unfair as it is, the likelihood that places, and I'll mention some of the names, Kokomo, Indiana, Detroit, Michigan, Buffalo, New York, Toledo, Ohio, could be deep sixed because they will not be able to accommodate the changes being asked. Similarly, in agriculture, the decarbonization needs identified in Energizing America for clean agricultural systems include prospective hopes that don't exist yet. So for example, if we're trying to absorb carbon in soil, that local farmers are trying to make regenerative because the soil is basically worn out in row crop production across the country. I am worried about how we make the transition without harming these communities, be they urban or rural. I represent both. And how we work with other federal agencies. I'm thinking we in Energy, Department of Energy, with Department of Energy responsibilities ought to have a cross-cutting hearing or convening with Department of Agriculture appropriations representatives. How can we coordinate these types of efforts, be they industrial or agricultural, to assure increased climate benefits and without harming the communities and industries that are in transition in our country, surrounded by a very unfair global marketplace, certainly in the vehicular industry. We're not offsetting their predatory practices. We're not offsetting their dumping. And here we are trying to fix something. I don't know the mechanisms to do that so the American people ultimately benefit. If you have thoughts on that, I would welcome them.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question, and I can go ahead and start. But I think you're right. You know, the United States was a leader in global solar photovoltaics and invented solar cells here in the U.S. And now 8 of the top 10 solar PV manufacturers are in China.
Yes.
And there is a concern that that could happen with electric vehicles. They produce and consume half of the world's electric vehicles. So that's a very real concern.
I didn't hear you. Half of the world's what?
Electric vehicles are produced and consumed in China right now. So I think to Dr. Partha Sarathy's point, it's important to engage the communities that are being impacted in the innovation process from the beginning. And I'm really interested in hearing what she has to say. I will say on agricultural sector, yeah, I think you're right. It's very important for the adopters of the technologies to be involved from the beginning. And that's part of the reason why I think USDA should continue to be the lead on agricultural decarbonization research, with DOE playing more of a supportive role, because USDA has those ties to the farmers and to the industry that will be consuming these new agricultural practices and agricultural technologies.
You made very wise comments, because in my region, the farmers tried to use methane digesters and they didn't work. So they're actually angry. They're angry. And they need a better solution. They need a workable solution. The issue of manure in the region that I represent is not a small issue. And we don't have an answer to that within our watershed. I think we have to develop a watershed mentality. And we need to look at what that watershed is producing and figuring out how we're going to reprocess material that has a future use. We're not yet doing that in any sense. We're tiptoeing toward a really massive transformational change in the way we handle materials, whether it's spent nuclear waste or spent cow fuel, whatever. We aren't very good at that yet, but we need to be within these watersheds. Within the automotive and vehicular sector, we need to look at the subsidy that the Chinese government is eating in the form of lost profits because they are underselling in the market. I mean, they are not, they don't have a normal balance sheet. And that the competition just isn't in the creation of a electric vehicle. It's in the inherent subsidy that state economy is providing. And they're going to do the same thing they did with steel. They are going to overproduce by 4 times and then dump in every market in the world, and we'll be wiped out. We can't be that stupid. I mean, we've got to figure out a way to offset that enormous negative force on innovation, creativity, and then adopting those technologies in an open economy like ours. So I don't know if you've done work on that, but I think that the economics of electric car production, country by country, is a very important element here so we can succeed. I know I'm over time. I'm going to go over to, and I'd appreciate any of your thoughts on that so we can pin down the reality of what we're dealing with. Congressman Simpson.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kaptur. I noticed we've talked about spent nuclear fuel and how we're going to handle it in the future and the challenge that it brings. I will just say that it's not a technology issue. It's a political issue. That's what it's come down to now. We got to decide politically what we're going to do with it. But I do want to thank all of the people here that have been testifying today. You've got some great ideas, and I look forward to being able to discuss them with you one-on-one, because you got some ideas of how we might be able to better invest our resources and get more bang for the buck. And I look forward to being able to sit down with each of you and talk about this. And Doctor, I'm gonna hammer this, so I won't try. Dr. Think
of it as 2 words: Partha Sarathi.
Partha Sarathi.
Close.
Is that right?
Pretty
Okay,
close,
I
yeah.
got that down. But I want you to contact our offices, or we'll contact you. But I'd like to sit down because you bring a subject to the table that, to be real honest, I have not spent much time in thinking about. And it's very interesting. And I'd like to sit down and talk to you about the challenges that we face and how we might be able to address them. So thank you for your testimony today. And then, Rich, I've got one question for you that hasn't been asked yet, and that is, you know, I read a book a few years ago, about 10 or 12 years ago, on the hydrogen economy. And there was a lot of research and development and thought about, you know, everything's going to move toward hydrogen and stuff. And then it seems to have died down a lot. Where are we in hydrogen, in moving toward a hydrogen energy transition? What role will that play in the future? And should the department be more involved in that?
Thanks so much for the question, Congressman. I think it's a really timely question because it died down, and then last year I think it started to come back. If we didn't think of 2020 as the year of COVID, I think we would have thought of it as the year of hydrogen, because there's quite a bit of new commercial activity, quite a bit of new policy interest in the space. Just to take a big step back, it remains an extremely important topic. We know we cannot electrify everything. Right? It will not be possible to use batteries will not be possible to do it economically for a number of things, like long haul shipping or long haul freight. For big parts of heavy duty industry, we're going to need fuels, right? Fuels are just very, very good and efficient at densely storing energy in very small spaces, and they're really good at producing a lot of heat. And we need those 2 characteristics. Hydrogen is the core for a clean fuel future. And it's a future where you could imagine using a lot of the existing infrastructure we already have, the trillions of dollars of gas pipelines, for example, that we have around this country, and using those, all the way into the second half of this century, just running a different kind of fuel through those same pipes. And that's a fuel based on hydrogen. So there's a couple of ways that I think we can do a lot more on in terms of investment. Right now, the DOE is already significantly funding pilots on using waste heat from nuclear plants to produce hydrogen. And I think that's a really important path for discovering this. It's actually possible that the cheapest way to produce hydrogen at scale is going to be doing something called high temperature electrolysis, which nuclear is kind of uniquely positioned to do. As well, we should be doing more in the carbon capture space. Today, the cheapest way to make clean hydrogen is called blue hydrogen. That's with using natural gas with steam methane reformation, which is the main way hydrogen is produced around the world today, but then bolting CCS, carbon capture, onto those steam methane reformers. That's the cheapest way to produce clean hydrogen today. And then there's a whole other realm of work around what folks call a green hydrogen, or that's using renewable electrons to produce that hydrogen. But I think it's going to be some combination of these different approaches and these different technologies. And then this hydrogen is going to be extremely useful in low carbon applications across all of these spaces. It may also be very useful in aviation fuels, for example, and in a variety of different places in heavier duty transportation and in heavier duty industry. So I do think that the hydrogen future, the hydrogen economy is still on us. It's probably not as broad as it was initially envisioned. I think batteries have come along so far and so fast that a lot of that simple passenger transportation is probably more likely to go toward batteries than it is toward hydrogen fuel cells. But anything that's bigger and heavier, I think hydrogen still has a major role to play.
Yeah, I think you could take our rail industry and make, because they can carry their own hydrogen tanks.
Absolutely.
It's a perfect way to do it. So anyway, I appreciate all you being here. Thank you, Marcy, for holding this hearing. I look forward to working with all of you as we try to investigate how to do a better job of our investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your serious work. You enlighten us all. Thank you so very, very much. I wanted to ask a question. Are there any, I come from a racing family, and my question is, with hydrogen technology, are there any racetracks that competitively race using hydrogen fuels, to your knowledge, in our country?
I am not sure about that, Congresswoman. I do know that there is a race series that uses electric vehicles, but it would be very interesting to look at hydrogen. Hydrogen is, of course, what we put in rocket ships to send them up to the moon. So I don't see, maybe other than some safety considerations, why you couldn't do the same for race cars.
Well, I'd like to ask you to help me envision what that might look like. I'd like to offer a racetrack in Toledo, Ohio. If you look at the AA fuel dragsters that we race across our region, where a lot of innovation comes from, I am really interested in the individual inventor. And I come from a part of the country where I have people that make parts, not just by numerically controlled machines, but they precede the numerically controlled machines. They are inventors who love transportation. And I would love to see a green energy racetrack in our country. And I'd like it to be in my home community, and I'll contribute to it because I know what these people are capable of. So, but I'm just interested in, the development of the technology. Just think of what I'm saying, and who we might be able to gather to participate in that. I've always viewed my hometown as the home of the Jeep, the home of the old Clyde Bicycle Works. I'm just a few miles from where Thomas Alva Edison invented the light bulb, and we just lost a great inventor and businessman named Norm Nitschke, who was a part of founding the company Solar Cells and First Solar and so many others, and was involved in the glass industry. And we have those kinds of minds, which are rare, taking basic research and applying it. And so I would be very interested, and I've got quite a few people back in my region interested in some kind of a race that would involve new fuels. So maybe think about it and give me any advice you might have. And I can't thank you. You were just a marvelous panel. Thank you so very much. And we hope many people beyond our subcommittee members will hear what you've had to say today. Each of you has something, you're really an outstanding group. I want to thank Jamie Schimek of our own staff, and Scott and Matt for helping us put this hearing together. And if you wish to submit any additional material to the record, please do, and we will be in touch with you. Thank you so very much. Bravo.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Chair.